Welcome to the Reclaim the Night Perth podcast, hosted by Sarah, Liz and Ava. Links to resources relating to the topics we discuss are in the description. We hope you enjoy!
There's there was a book that my mother had when I was growing up, and I tracked down a few copies of it. It was a book from the 70s, I think. Tracked down a few copies of it a few years ago, and I think I gave you guys a copy each as gifts, and I still have mine, and it's a book called Feminist Graffiti. And
have that.
Yeah. So the writer had traveled across the UK, I believe, and just sort of compiled this collection of vaguely or explicitly feminist themed graffiti that she found in public places, including bathrooms and things like that, and put it together into a very entertaining little book that is literally just smeared with sort of like graffiti. And one of the very relevant ones, I mean, I'm not sure where this was written, but obviously this woman probably had some things to say about marriage, because it said, it begins when you sink into his arms and it ends with your arms in his sink.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, what poetry?
Yeah, I remember looking at that book when I was a kid, and I should have been, turns out that just saying these things to girls doesn't actually necessarily do the trick, because I still pursued romance right off the edge of a cliff almost, with no thought to the practicalities or anything like that. So just saying it's not enough either, because how do you counter the cultural narratives, like how do you counter the movies and TV and music?
Those values can be terrible. I mean, the other thing is that women and girls see through this stuff, but too late. And often when they don't have independence, or they're tied down in some material way. And
you realize there's no good realizing it once you've fallen for the scam, like once you're in it,
once you're trapped.
Once you're trapped.
I think at the same time as we have this pink haze, rose-tinted glasses kind of narrative of happily ever after, and the importance of romance and how life-changing romance can be and all that kind of stuff, we also don't have anything that tells women and girls to listen to their gut in any way.
Yes.
So when they do the narratives about domestic violence, like spreading the awareness of this stuff is out there more and more and more, and women and girls are more aware of this kind of issue, increasingly so, even if it's in a stereotypical way, they still have an idea of of this stuff increasingly, and hopefully continue to do so. But that doesn't, so they have that information, but when they feel it, they don't know that they should be trusting that feeling, because everything in their life has told them that you don't trust your gut, you don't trust you're hysterical.
And you also see, some popular, I'm not going to call it literature. There are books out there that actually really actively sell behavior that is domestic violence. I mean, absolutely horrendous. And yet we are framing that flutter of anxiety at coercion as we're framing it as sexual chemistry, and that's a really dangerous thing. We need women, we need girls to stand strong in who they are, understand their boundaries, and be able to trust their gut. I mean, I think the risk of the things we say about domestic violence, the risk is that we talk about it still like monsters, and so it's really hard to see the early stages and go, oh, that's where that goes. A man who fails the no test, and some of them fail pretty spectacularly pretty quickly. If you ignore that response, if you give always the benefit of the doubt, if you don't put you first, that can trap you. And it is really difficult. Yeah, it is really difficult to give that messaging consistently, because obviously the society we're in wants to stop, to an extent, violence against women, but it wants women to be coerced broadly into these roles, and the violence is one of the strongest forms of coercion.
We've got some pretty contradictory narratives going on in the kind of mainstream in the 21st century, right? Because encouragingly, we have, a bigger societal voice saying violence against women is wrong, right? Which is good.
Huge improvement in the last 50 years, yes.
But at the same time, we also have another huge voice that overlaps a lot with the same people that are saying that, who are totally cool with sexualizing violence against women, for example, in like
Yeah.
violent pornography. They're cool with that. You know, there's, I think, a fair amount of cognitive dissonance. And one side of this is actually really good and well-intentioned, but it's like, I think on a lot of levels quite undermined by the other part of it that seems to be contradicting it. So that's not, it seems obvious, but actually, you know, those are not ideas that I necessarily interrogated until I was in my late 20s.
I think it's also undermined, but I think, you know, those positive changes are undermined by the superficiality of some of the analysis that sits with them. So I think just going, oh, but why does he do that? This is terrible. We should really teach boys to be different. You know, we need to understand that these things don't happen. They don't happen in a vacuum. I guess some of the analysis, you know, some of the changes talk about that, but they happen for really concrete reasons. And if we're not actually understanding the roles of men and women and what it is that they provide society, the surface edge, you know, that surface opposition to the violence isn't going to achieve the kind of cultural change it needs to, because we've touched on the surface of it. We haven't actually got to the root of what is going on. I mean, and that's because it's fairly unpopular, really.
And I think it's still constantly talked about as an individual thing, because I think we are still caught up in the idea that we say, okay, let's critique this issue that predominantly men do, and we're not even talking about violence against women. We're talking about so many different avenues in which there is a issue that majority men do, often against majority women. And it's like, well, we need to talk about this issue because it has devastating negative consequences on an oppressed class. But at the same time, not all men within the same, you know, paragraph, within the same sentence. Like, we can't seem to understand that a critique of men as a class is not a critique of your favorite man in the room or whatever.
Yeah, we've got to be able to have that conversation about sex class.
Yeah, and to say, and also to say that actually maybe the guy in the room with you that you love so much is also part of the problem, whether intentionally or not. Like, they are entitled. They grew up with the idea that they are always right. They never had that narrative of you're hysterical and things like that. So like they do trust their gut. They do believe firmly that their thought is correct. And when they're told a different story, they go, no, because I know that I'm right. And it's not until they're really challenged, that they go, oh, maybe I should actually listen to your experience, because you might know more about yourself than I do. And it's like, you know, that's not violence. That's not even mass violence. That's not sexual violence. But that is still a part of the overarching cultural problem that men commit against women, that allows for this narrative to continue, that allows for violence to continue and stuff like that. We have to challenge every facet of this problem.
And you know, there's a real question in there about what it is that we do about it. And you know, there are real challenges for society, and really specifically for parents of sons, feminist mothers of sons. Like, how you raise your son is really critical. It's not enough to just be treating them the same and hoping that they get the messages about being nice. I think you've got to do really explicit counter socialization.
The other thing about going back to the thing about, you know, the ways that this stuff is entrenched and male violence against women and stuff like that. Thing is, when we talk about things like, you know, domestic violence in terms of male violence against women and stuff, we don't talk about it. Like, women's suffering is not central to that conversation. So often it's a conversation, it's a very like principled conversation about whether or not a man has transgressed, you know, against social norms in some way. Like, the conversation seems to take place on that level, rather than having the fact that a woman's clearly, you know, been hurt and has been made to suffer and is like, you know, harmed now, being at the center of that conversation. So even when the crime or the transgression in question is literally causing physical harm to a woman, the woman's suffering is not really a part of that conversation in the way that it should be.
I mean, it's interesting when we think about the women who've died over the last, you know, almost decade that I've been involved in Reclaim the Night, and the ones which have actually captured public attention. You know, Ima Sawe, Eurydice Dixon. I mean, always we find it a lot easier to focus on stranger stranger violence, because it's so hard to think about, you know, the men in every woman's life being the one. So we don't do that. We talk about stranger danger, which is, you know, really not statistically the big thing. I think the counter to that was the death of Hannah Clark, the murder of Hannah Clark and their 3 children. And there was something about that actually caught the public attention, because so many of these deaths, people are horrified, and then the moment passes. It's really hard to get any kind of momentum to do anything about it. And I kind of wonder, you know, what is it about Hannah Clark's death, you know, and the death of her children? What is it about that murder that allowed us to capture the public imagination when it is a husband? And I think it's because that arsehole, whoever he was, cannot remember his name, and he doesn't deserve to be named. He was a monster. Like, he was one of, you know, and so again, we're comfortable talking about it because he was so far gone that it's into monster territory. And again, it doesn't challenge our understanding of our favorite men and the idea of husbands and wives, because, you know, we don't want to talk about the fact that this mostly happens in intimate partner relationships. In America, the last time I saw the stats, the most dangerous part of work for women was their partners. You know, the most common cause of workplace death for women in America was fatal male violence. You know, their partners coming and killing them, which is pretty telling. And so, you know, even our discussion, I mean, not even slightly tempered, our discussion about fatal male violence, men murdering women, is still hobbled by the fact that we don't want to impact on our understanding of nuclear families and, you know, heterosexual relationships. We don't want to impact on romance. God forbid we kill that industry.
Yeah, because when we talk about things, because obviously the murder of Hannah Clark and her children was sadistic and heinous and public, and and
I mean, particularly horrifying, very public and horrifying.
Very particularly horrifying. And I think that the thing about, you know, it is uncomplicated for people to react with horror to that. And because there's not a whole lot in the way of shades of grey there. And like you say, Liz, like, there's not a whole lot there that is calling on us to examine the things that are like really uncomfortable. And so those really, the monsters who commit these, you know, the sadistic crimes, and that the really horrifying crimes, like viscerally horrifying crimes, even a bunch of men who hit their wives and stuff would look at those crimes and go, wow, what a monster, you know.
And yet this, and you know, that 2017, when we had 3 family annihilations, I'm trying to remember which one it was. You know, there was a guy who shot his family and his children, and people are still saying, at the point where they know that he has shot his children to death, they're still saying, oh, but he was a good dad. We don't, because it wasn't, I mean, I would say that it's kind of viscerally horrifying, but it clearly doesn't hit some kind of cultural threshold for us to go, holy hell, that is over the line, because we're still empathizing. And, you know, the woman, and I apologize to any of her relatives, I cannot remember her name. There have been so many women killed over the last decade, but a woman who had acquired disabilities, and the response to him killing her was, you know, that he was really stressed and put upon by her disability. And it beggars belief. I mean, when you look at, you know, what happens when, you know, women get cancer and men get cancer. When women get cancer, there's a far greater rate of men leaving them, you know. And I've been in the cancer groups and I've seen some of those conversations. Can't remember the stats offhand, but they were stark. And when, you know, husbands get cancer, wives stick by them to the end, often at points when they shouldn't, because it's a complicated journey. And yeah, there can be really horrible cases where women are being abused. But yeah, everywhere we see these power dynamics again and again, and we are just culturally we're refusing to discuss them because it might undermine the very basis of how we organize society. So yeah, down with the industry of romance.
I also, just to add another element to this conversation, is how the narrative of romance ties into the idea of men and women's agency. How in romance, women don't have agency. Men have agency. Men have the agency to leave a romance if they don't want to. Men have the agency to choose who they want to be romantically involved in, to make the first move or whatever.
Women
women-
propose, men propose, women
Mm.
accept.
And so you know, when you get to those points in time where whether it be abuse or the woman is just tired of her shitty boyfriend, it doesn't even have to be physical abuse or anything like that. He's just annoying and she doesn't love him anymore. She may not feel comfortable leaving because, oh, he's really mentally unwell right now and I shouldn't really leave him. Whereas that if it was the tables were turned, he'd be like, you know, my life is my own and I should be able to do whatever the fuck I want, so I'm going to leave. You know, women don't have agency in their lives in so many facets, if any, so that when things get tough and they want to leave, they don't feel that they emotionally can because it's not fair on their partner. And yeah, it's rough.
We constantly expect women to become second in their own lives.
Yes.
Yeah, that actually touches on something that was on my mind earlier as well when we were talking about gut feelings and, you know, girls being actively socialized into like not recognizing or trusting their gut feelings or anything. And I was thinking about how women so often just wanting or not wanting something or being unhappy or recognizing that they could be happier are not sufficient justification for women to say no to men on a number of levels, right? Women tend to want some kind of like definitive proof that justifies saying no, whether it be leaving a relationship, like you just said, Ava. It's actually, for a lot of women, it's not enough that they're just not happy there. They're not really into him, you know, they're kind of bored and done with it. The relationship's not really fulfilling for them anymore. Like for a lot of men, that is more than enough reason to call it quits. But for a lot of women, that's just like kind of business as usual. And like, it's not until like he has to actually transgress and make himself a bad guy in some way for them to feel sufficiently justified that then they're allowed to end it and not be, you know, unfair or be a villain or anything. And that can be true of that situation where it's in a relationship, or even if it's just about associating with men, because a lot of women subject themselves to the company of
unwanted
men
attention
and social interaction with men that they are not interested in or they actively don't want, simply because a man has to prove himself evil before a woman is allowed to say no. Whereas actually in reality, you're allowed to just not like talking to that guy and decide not to talk to him. You're allowed to just not really get a good vibe. And you know what? It's allowed to be unfair. Maybe you are misjudging a man because there's this whole idea that, you know, you don't want to unfairly judge a man. You don't want to judge a man to be a bad guy when actually he's a good guy, because that would be so unjust. Who fucking cares? Like, it sucks to be that guy. We all get, you know,
women aren't public fucking commodities. Excuse the language. Women aren't public commodities who men have access to unless they prove themselves invalid. Women should be the agents in their own lives and be able to, as you say, Sarah, go, wow, I don't like the vibe of him, I'm gone. We punish women for that.
Yeah, we all get misjudged for, you know, superficial reasons from time to time. It happens to everyone, and yeah, that sucks or whatever, but like, really, you're allowed to take the risk that you're judging unfairly and just so, I don't like this, I don't want to do it. I'm not getting good vibes from that guy, so I don't want to talk to him. I'm not finding this social relationship with this man rewarding in any way, so I'm not really interested in continuing it. You don't need to wait until a man does something that everyone else around you is going to objectively agree is bad, because that almost never happens. That only happens when men burn their families alive in public,
it doesn't
right?
even happen when
it doesn't even
it
happen
doesn't
then
even
necessarily.
happen then.
I think that there's things that we have a tendency to treat as being sacred, and we probably shouldn't. And one of those things is about the way that we talk about reproduction. Obviously, I am very much a freedom of choice person in that regard, of course. At the same time, it's very taboo to go a step further and say, yeah, there are situations in which actually objectively the best choice is to terminate a pregnancy or even avoid pregnancy, for example. And that's
there are abusers who will 100% make sure that a woman is pregnant because it ties her to him. I mean, if you are going to be tied, I mean, being tied to an abuser through a child is the worst form of ongoing abuse. I mean, there have been women killed. There was the woman killed a few years ago in a mediation room up in Joondalup in a custody mediation. He killed her in that room. Beyond the extreme, so many women are subjected to ongoing domestic violence via their exes because of custody arrangements. I 100% think women need to be really careful who they have children with. Having children with an abuser is a particular ring of hell that I think most women who've been through it would not wish on anyone. Women, I think, need to be really clear-eyed about this and go, is he actually going to be, do I want to have breakfast with this guy forever? Is he going to be a good father? Is he going to be a reliable partner? Make really clear choices. Be unromantic about it.
Yes.
Ruthless. It's your life.
Yeah, I which is where, my sort of controversial take on this is that a sort of generic pro-choice type approach to discussing things like reproduction, contraception, and abortion actually needs to go a bit further than that and needs to skew more in the direction of erring towards no as the default, actually, rather than just this whatever you feel, like whatever it is that you really want and whatever. Like, no, sometimes what you want is actually irrational, dangerous, and probably harmful to
because it doesn't take place in a
question.
vacuum, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't take place in a vacuum. It takes place in a world in which women have been socialized, groomed for a couple of decades into thinking that this is what they should do and knowing that they will get social condemnation for not doing it.
Yeah. And I think the same is true also of marriage as well. Like, we almost take a similar sort of, like, well, a lot of us, not all of us, there's obviously a pretty impressive cohort of feminists out there that are explicitly anti-natalist and anti-marriage, but just more generally, these are things that are seen where it's seen as taboo to skew one way or the other. Like, the acceptable thing is to take that perspective of, like, whatever's right for you. But often what you want is actually not necessarily what is right for you, depending on how you're measuring what's right for you. Like, marriage
and it
is
might be a bit too late to work it out, 9 months down the track.
Yeah.
I think have really honest discussions with young girls about their plans for their lives, their plans for their bodies, what they want to do, what they actively want when they're not in a pink haze, so that they've had the thoughts beforehand. It's kind of the best we've got in some ways.
You have been listening to the Reclaim the Night Perth podcast. To catch future episodes or see what else we are doing, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or YouTube.